Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Hockey Journey Podcast. Episode number 134, The Blake Sloan Hockey Journey, Part 1. Presented to you by onlinehockeytraining.com. I'm your host, Coach Lance Pitlick. If you're new here, please make sure you subscribe so you won't miss out on any future episodes. Before we take a stroll around the park with a dude that just won, hear the incredible hockey life of our next guest, Blake Sloan, and begin this conversation. If you want to learn more about me, my hockey experiences, what I know, and most importantly, how I've been helping hockey players get really good with a stick and puck, just head on over to onlinehockeytraining.com, that's onlinehockeytraining.com, and gain instant access to my 10-part video series where I'll show you everything. Consider it my gift to you. Lastly, if you live in Minnesota or are visiting the state of hockey sometime soon and want to schedule an in-person off-ice stick skills lesson, I'd love to have the opportunity to show you my little world. Go to sweethockeycoach.com, that's sweethockeycoach.com, and watch the video on the homepage for instructions. Thanks, and I look forward to working with you sometime soon. I can't wait to share my next guest, Blake Sloan's hockey journey, because it is truly remarkable. Let me quickly summarize it in a couple sentences. Broken ankle, broken face, high school championship, NCAA national champion, Stanley Cup champion, a Europe Professional League championship, and was on the bench when one of his Michigan teammates introduced the world to the now famous, the original Michigan move and lacrosse-style goal. Though he accomplished and experienced a lot of the good stuff during his incredible hockey journey, unfortunately, the road he traveled wasn't scripted to perfection, not having any challenges or hardships along the way where everything just came easy for him. That doesn't happen for anyone, and Mr. Sloan was no exception. If you want to hear the story of a kid who let his character, work ethic, adaptability, and never give up mentality until you get what you want, then buckle up, because we're in for a wild ride. So ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming Blake Sloan to the show. Mr. Sloan, welcome to the Hockey Journey Podcast.
You know, Lance, I've been watching and listening to some of your stuff for a while, and I've just been waiting for the opportunity to get on with you. So I appreciate you having me.
I didn't even know you played college hockey, so wow, cool. This is awesome.
And guess what? The Mighty Blue Machine is going to be in town next week.
Oh, I know. So good luck to you guys. He means Michigan. Doggone it. Okay. Well, anyways, this is going to be fun. There's a lot. This real quick. This guy won a Stanley Cup champion, national champion at Michigan, was on the bench when the Michigan, the now famous Michigan goal, Michigan move, whatever you want to call it, was done. He was on the bench during that game live. So we're going to get to all that. But how I start all the shows where I'm interviewing someone is I'd like you to rewind the tape. Let's take a moment, look in the rearview mirror, and go back to the beginning. Where'd you grow up? What was your childhood like? Your parents, siblings, friends? Your introduction to hockey and other sports, how you climbed the ladder. Basically, tell the listeners in a nutshell what the heck it was like growing up Blake Sloan.
Oh, geez, Lance, that's a lot there. But yeah, I was born and raised in Morton Grove, Illinois, a suburb just north of Chicago. Probably about 20 minutes if there's no traffic. Right down 94. One of the bigger suburbs right next to it is Skokie. So people kind of know Skokie and Evanston, where Northwestern is. I was about 3.5, 4 miles from Northwestern. And I grew up a real active, probably ADHD before it was diagnosed, kid. Had a lot of trouble sitting still in class and school. But fortunately, I had some very tolerant and welcoming teachers that really saw an opportunity to kind of hone in the educational side of things. Now, this is not to mention my mother was a physical education teacher within that school district for 35 years. So she was very aware of the teachers that I was quote unquote being given when I was in my grammar school. So she had often had conversations with those guys and gals and teachers that would be the best fit for me when I was at school in my grammar school there. I grew up playing all types of different sports. I grew up playing baseball. I did a little soccer, and then karate found a way into my life as well. And that was, probably one of my biggest mentors growing up. I started karate when I was about 6, and did that actively and competitively until I was about 16. And Sensei Cohn was someone who kind of channeled and allowed me and gave me the ability and the tools to kind of focus. And it's a fantastic sport. And any of you young people out there who get a chance to do something like that with a fantastic teacher, I wouldn't hesitate in the slightest. It's a fantastic opportunity for strength and flexibility and coordination and compete and all those things that we talk about for a well-rounded multi-sport athlete, if you will.
Yeah.
And not to mention, it gave me some really good tools and whatnot when I was in the classroom, which was really important to my mom and dad. I have one sibling who is 2 years younger than me, a sister. She still lives in Orland Park, Illinois, to this day. And she was also actively engaged in sports. Both my mom and dad were, I would say, sports fanatics. My mom was a gymnastics and cross country and track coach for 25 years. My dad grew up in Chatham, Ontario, and I would say that he was the biggest influence in me getting involved with hockey as a young person, because at that time in Illinois, the Blackhawks were never on TV. So I never had a chance to follow the Blackhawks. I didn't have a team I followed. The only team that was in the area that I followed was the University of Illinois at Chicago, the Flames. So D1 hockey. So we would always look at the schedule and people would come down, other teams would come in, NCAA hockey would come in, and we would go see Air Force, and we would go see University of Alaska Anchorage, and we would get to see Bowling Green. So I grew up a big hockey fan. A college hockey fan in that regard, and got to see a lot of good teams come in. Now, UIC wasn't a great team, so they got stomped a lot, but I was always, in the stands with the other 3,000 people at most watching those games as a kid. But I think, my mom's influence and my dad's influence on me as a young person was just playing as many different things and keeping me as active as possible. Their philosophy in parenting was the more things that I was doing would keep me out of trouble, quote unquote. And they were exactly right. I really didn't have much time to find trouble. My buddies and I would find ourselves at a park down the road playing flag football and tackle football, and we would play baseball down there. And we had tennis matches and fast pitch against the brick side of a wall and all those sorts of sports that, we would just do after school on a routine basis. And we had lots of fun doing that. And then I found myself with an opportunity to get into high school. My mom was kind of watching from afar at that point, and now I was enrolled at Niles West in Skokie there, where she was a teacher. So that was an interesting experience for me being there. With her in the same building, although she did do the physical education side with all the girls. So a lot of my friends, had her in class, and fortunately, I didn't have the opportunity to have her as a teacher. So, but she was very aware of what was going on and that sort of stuff. So, I think I'm probably unique in the sense that I ended up going to 4 different high schools. And so my first year was in Illinois, and we can get into the hockey side of it later, but there was an opportunity for me to go to a prep school in Boston my sophomore year. And I went out and did an experience for 2 years at Tabor Academy, and then wound up playing junior hockey and transferred a couple of years before I ended up at the University of Michigan. So not a normal childhood by any means, but definitely something that allowed me the ability to adapt and meet all types of different people.
Did you have, I know you played a lot of sports and you did a lot of things with your neighborhood buddies and stuff at the park and stuff like that, but did you do any off ice, like shooting at home or at the park? Did you work with a skating instructor, a skills person? I mean, how did you kind of get to the point where you're like, okay, I want to see how far I can take this hockey thing?
There's two questions there, Lance. I think the first one is, I definitely, I had a little shooting area in the back of my house. But honestly, that was only used, in Chicago in the winter. I'm playing a lot. So, I didn't have the setup that I get to see very often here in Plymouth, Minnesota, where they have an active area where you can shoot indoors kind of all year round, which is fantastic, right? And then I would use my garage for stick handling. At that time, I think the big thing was taking the electrical black tape around a tennis ball and making that super tight, and that was sort of or golf ball back in those days. And we would stick handle and do things like that for hand-eye and whatnot in the garage. But that's kind of the side piece of it. I think for me, it's a little bit different now, Lance. It's intriguing as I kind of sit from a parental view now, and you see these activities that are going all year round, whether it's gymnastics or soccer or hockey or all of these different activities. And my family, like many of the families around our area, the hockey season ended. We'll call it end of March or early April. And shoot, I think the only time I picked up my skates in the summer was for a 1-week camp that I went to in Blenheim, Ontario. And to be perfectly honest, the reason that happened was it was a chance for me to go up there. I would spend a week doing the camp and stay with my grandpa. And then I would spend a week just visiting with him up there. So it was kind of an opportunity for me to go up there and spend time with Grandpa Jimmy.
Sure.
And that was probably the only time in the summer that I would skate until the age of about 12, to be honest. I the baseball glove came out, and I was, so excited at that point to, get the baseball glove out and start hitting and getting my stroke back from the hitting standpoint. And when that ended, in September, all of a sudden the skates came back out and I was just jazzed up and ready to go for the year in hockey. So, and intermixed in that was the karate I was doing and whatnot. So, I think the skill development side of sports and any sport, it's so elevated now in so many different ways. You've the nutritionist and the mental side, and you've got the skating, the development stuff. And I just talked with one of my buddies who's the assistant GM out in Seattle for the Kraken, and he said, Blake, it's really interesting. It's, you've got these teams, and our team is made up of basically 23 individual entities with like a supporting cast that supports this one player. Like they have their sports psychologists and their doctors and all this stuff, right? And now it's like this sort of team within the team that you sort of have to go through, and the agents and all these different things. So, the landscape of it is so different now. And I'm almost, aging and dating myself when I say this stuff, because people listening might be like, geez, this guy's, must be 100. But it really, it happens really fast. I mean, even in my professional career of 17 years, how the development of, me as a professional and the strength training evolved from the start of that all the way to the end. It's ever changing and very unique and specified now.
So one common thread as we kind of, how does my mom say it, finagle our way through your hockey life. This is a reoccurring thing that happens. You become a champion all the time, it seems like. So your first one was in one of the 4 high schools you're at. Talk about that. And then you ended up going to Michigan. So transition from winning the championship to, how did you end up at Michigan? Were there other schools that were interested? How did that all happen?
Yeah, I think even even going back to when I made the decision to go out to prep school, Lance, I was still a really active, and I loved baseball, like absolutely loved it. I wouldn't say I loved it more than hockey, but they were equal to me.
Really?
And to be honest, yeah, I loved both sports equally. And the season that I was in, I just totally thrust myself into it and just embraced the heck out of both of them. Um, and to be honest, one of the reasons I did make the decision the family decision to go out to prep school is I was cut from my only team in that area. Chicago now is, I would say, almost a hotbed of, uh, with many, many, many different organizations and teams. And at the level that I was playing at, there was two teams. There was the Young Americans and Team Illinois. And the Young American team, which I was playing for, brought another kid in at the defenseman, and I ended up not being asked to return that following year. So I really had no place to play my freshman year in high school. To be honest, at the time, I thought it was the biggest devastating thing in the universe. And that year as a freshman, I ended up trying out for a AA midget team. And, I've been very fortunate, Lance, to get an opportunity to play for, some really influential coaches and whatnot. And Coach Mueller at the time brought me on board as a 130-pound freshman, and the entire team was made up of juniors and seniors. So for the first time in my life, I had to figure out how to, use my leverage as a strong little person to, gauge my, to it's physical, the physicality of it was a huge step. You know, as a parent now looking at my son, would that be something I'd want to do? I mean, I look at, Zam Plant and these guys that played varsity hockey as a freshman, and he got his shoulder all blown out of place. I played with Derek, in Dallas, and he was saying, Blake, that was kind of the skill set he was at. I was nowhere near the skill level of a Zam Plant. Let's be perfectly honest. I was just trying to find a place to play that, would give me a chance to develop. And because I was cut from that team and I had that opportunity that year, I really put myself in a position then when I went out to Tabor as a sophomore to really contribute to that championship winning team that we had out there. And we had some outstanding players. At the time, there were kind of two trains of thought. If you were going to leave home, and that was probably going up to St. Mike's in Toronto at that time, which would have been a completely different experience, I'm sure. But the prep school scene at that time was a really great opportunity to not only get an unbelievable education, but I could also still play baseball. And I knew many kids out there that were going to, the Babsons, and they were going to, Colby, Connecticut College. At that time, Lance, honestly, I had aspirations of playing, college hockey or college baseball of some sort, but never in my wildest dreams at that point did I ever, think that was going to be something that was going to happen based on where I was in my developmental path.
Yeah.
I went out to Tabor, played on an outstanding team as a younger person, and you'll hear some of the common, threads throughout my talk here about the things I learned as a younger person, and then evolving into, being a quote unquote veteran or a leader on a team. Were kind of all these small situations. And it started as me being a freshman playing with juniors and seniors that first year as a midget. And then I went to prep school, and I had some unbelievable senior leaders on that team that kind of taught me how to work hard and to commit to doing something, bigger than yourself and doing something for a team. And then I went to Michigan and had the great fortune of playing with guys like David Oliver and Steve Shields and Cam Stewart and Brian Wiseman, who were seniors at that time, who kind of indoctrinated me into the Michigan way and the things that Coach Berenson really wanted to see out of individuals and thus the team.
So when did you, first, what year did you win the championship with the prep school? And then, talk a little bit about the recruiting process of going to Michigan, because I got to think that there was more than one school interested.
There were some schools interested. I actually had being a Chicago kid, Larry Pedri was the coach at UIC at that time, and he actually offered me an opportunity to go there in early signing period as a junior. So I had an opportunity to go to UIC and play at home and do those sorts of things. And at that time, I just, wasn't in a position in my life or my career to make that decision. Um, at that time, Lance, you're still, I went to school as right as at 5 years old. I just turned 5. So there was no holding back or any of the stuff that sort of happens now. So I was still developing and still learning to play. And that was when I was still at Tabor. The coach that I had gone out to play for at Tabor ended up leaving and going to join a junior team. And at that point, 2 years of prep school, if you know anything about the rigors, and I know you do with having Rem at Shattuck, Tabor was a very aggressive academic place. And every single night I'd have 2 to 2.5 hours of homework, mandatory study hall from 7 o'clock to 9. And after 2 years of that, to be honest, it was wearisome. And, I was like, hey, I think I've kind of got my habits down. I've got my rhythm down. I think I'd like to try something different. At that point, I, played some summer hockey. I did some hockey night in Boston tournaments and went and joined the first year that the Boston Junior Bruins was assembled for a guy by the name of Ted. Yeah, for the guy by the name of Ted Kelly. And the Boston Junior Bruins are still around, but we were the first team. And we had 13 guys from that team play D1 hockey. And the other 8 were, probably convicts or dropouts from school. So we had a very eclectic bunch of guys in our team, but we could stick and play. And we did a tour. Our first tournament that year was in Toronto, where Billy Powers, the assistant coach from Michigan, was there. I think Red was there as well from Michigan. And they came down and talked to me after that and said, we'd be interested in having you come for a visit at some juncture. Would you keep Michigan on your radar? And I said, absolutely. They called me that week and they said, hey, we're not going to waste your time unless we're willing to offer you a scholarship to fly you out here and look at Michigan until we're ready to do that. And that was code for saying, hey, we're looking at another kid. And we were waiting for him to decide, right? And 2 days later, Coach Berenson called me and said, hey, Blake, we'd like to fly you out on Thursday and come on out here. And I said, oh, my goodness. I'm supposed to be in a tournament this weekend. Obviously, my coach would have been like, yes, you're not going to the tournament. You're going to go out and see Michigan. And I ended up going out to Michigan and doing my official visit, quote unquote. And they offered me an opportunity to come there. So at that point, honest to goodness, Lance, I had University of Illinois at Chicago, and then I had Michigan to look at. And I was a huge, believer the first time I stepped on campus. I really enjoyed the campus. I knew what kind of academic institution it was. And, they were also losing 5 or 4 defensemen that year. Actually, very, very, very excellent defensemen, David Harlock and Chris Tamer. Aaron Ward was in that class that left as well. So they were leaving, they were losing all American defensemen. And then they were going to replace that with me, 5'9" defenseman. And I said, geez, this is, and Coach Berenson, I really liked his demeanor. I liked his approach. And I really enjoyed, I thought that would be the best place for me to go. So there really wasn't a whole lot of looking around. And, in my opinion, Michigan was the place for me, right from the get-go.
It's amazing. When I was doing my research for this episode, how both of our careers, though years is decades later. How old are you right now?
48.
40. So it's not that far. Maybe not decades.
Yeah, we're not that far off, Lance. Come on.
Almost a decade, but it just
Okay.
they parallel so many things. Like when I listen to what same thing for me for my college recruiting process. I got a couple letters in the mail from North Dakota, maybe St. Cloud. No, not
Yeah.
even St. Cloud, but Michigan Tech, and then all of a sudden Minnesota came in and they offered a half scholarship, and I'm like, all right, I got no one else knocking down the door, so didn't even do a recruiting thing. So, anyways, there's more to come on that. All right, let's talk about the year. So you go to Michigan. They just are one of the premier programs in the country year after year, and I'd like to think Minnesota is too. But
For sure. For sure.
but talk about that special year that you guys won the national championship. Did right out of the gate, did you kind of say, this year seems different, or how did it unfold?
Well, so let's back up just 1 second, Lance. The thing that's interesting, when I got to Michigan, that senior class that I mentioned before, with Harlock and Tamer and Neaton, and Aaron Ward and these guys, and that class was kind of the first recruiting class where, if you're a Michigan hockey fan at all, which probably not many people on the episode are, before that, Red had many, many, many losing seasons. I mean, he took over a program in shambles. Didn't have a lot of direction, and it took him a good 10 years before they started kind of on that path. And I think he would attribute sort of the directional change when he recruited that class. So that was 4 years where they started to sort of win, and they made the tournaments, and they sort of just were knocking at the door, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And then my class came in, and I think you could probably say, Red to this day would say that was one of, the best recruiting classes that he ever had. And not because of a Blake Sloan, but, a Brendan Morrison, a John Madden, a Warren Looning, a Jason Botterill, all guys drafted in the first and second round. That was kind of the next step of like the echelon of evolution, where all of a sudden these guys were having to make tough decisions after their freshman and sophomore year if they were going to stay. And, after my freshman year, we had 4 guys that were seriously considering leaving. And, 3 of them were my roommates. And I'll get into the story later of how, basically their agent was sitting in my house and was like, "Hey, Blake, do you want to play hockey next year?" And I'm like, yeah, but I have no money. And he's like, "Well, I'm going to represent you." And I'm like, "Okay, great." That's pretty much how my professional career started. But it was because of those guys and their willingness to, they came to Michigan to do something special. We had a tremendous class. We had some great leadership, in the classes above. And as sophomores, we came back, and it just started this sort of transformation of like, you know what, we're not just going to start knocking on the door. We're going to start, like, the expectation now is to win. And that was like this sort of evolution in the history of Michigan hockey. And I think, the program has taken leaps and bounds and steps, beyond that even to this day. But I think it starts, with that initial class of, the Harlocks and the Neatons and those guys, and sprinkled in a few other guys even prior to that. And, the Felsners, Denny Felsner was there. They got him to come in there. And all of a sudden this evolutionary change kind of happened. And, the expectations changed from like, we didn't have a building with 1,000 people in it. Like, you couldn't even get student tickets. People were rabid to come see it. It kind of became one of the most challenging and difficult places to play in America. As far as Yost, you got 7,000 fans that are just right on top of you, the way that the seating is in that place. And all of a sudden it really just helped to propel the next generation of recruiting classes. Marty Turco comes in after that as a freshman, and he takes over for Steve Shields. And it just continues this great legacy of players that come in after that. And I give Coach Berenson and Mel Pearson and Billy Powers, who were the assistants there, a great amount of credit for, bringing in a lot of very talented players, but all players from different walks of life. A kid from BC and Calgary, and a kid from Toronto, a kid from Chicago, and all of a sudden you're like, how do we all get along and promote this program and help it win? So it was fun. It was such a special place to be, and I'm just extraordinarily grateful to have had the opportunity, to be honest.
So one other thing, I think it was the year that you won the national championship, but it was the game going into the finals. Where you're sitting on the bench just getting a squirt of Gatorade, and something happens, and you're like, did I just see what I just saw? Talk about that.
Well, that was the kids call it now the Michigan, and I'm like, Mike Legg should, have that thing patented and be getting all the accolades for that, as far as I'm concerned. But at that time, there was one other person, and his last name was Armstrong, who had did it in a professional game for the Detroit Vipers. And I think he had done it a year before that. And the funny thing about the story is, after practice, everyone screws around and does different things. And Coach Berenson would usually stay on the ice for a few minutes. And, at 62 years old of when he was, depending on if, you were playing a lot, he would race guys up and down the ice. He would work on people's backhands. He would, always do things that you should be working on. Well, Legger would stand down there and try to do that stupid Michigan behind the net. And I remember him on several occasions skating behind him and say, Legger, do something that's actually you're going to do sometime, and just give him a hard time about it. And if you know Mike Legg and all, he's just a real happy-go-lucky, and he would kind of giggle and say, oh, Coach, I'm going to do this sometime. I'm going to do this sometime. I promise. And the fantastic thing about it is people forget that they think that was the goal that kind of propelled us, and won a national championship. Well, that was a game, ironically, against Minnesota. And we were down 2-1, and Minnesota, we handled them fairly well throughout the year. And they had our number that game. And it was late in the second period, and we were getting hemmed in. And we finally got an opportunity where Legger gets behind the net, and I can just see it now, where the two defensemen just kind of sit on the post, and he goes down, and in a matter of a half a second, reaches around and lacrosses this into the net. And it's the first time in my life I've ever seen Coach Berenson like smile or smirk on the bench. And we just all kind of looked at him, and we thought he was going to go crazy for a minute, and that tied the game up. And in the third period, it just, you kind of felt this sort of like, oh my gosh, that just really happened. Now, okay, let's just play hockey now. And all of a sudden the team just kind of took it to the next level. We ended up scoring early in the third period and scored one more, and ended up, getting us into the Frozen Four. It was still called the Final Four at that time in Cincinnati, after we beat the Gophers in that game. As my father-in-law, who is a diehard Gopher fan, tells me, Blake, that was an illegal goal. And that was a cheater goal. So I have to deal with, living in Minnesota now, and people still ask me about that, and now I'm old enough to say, that was one of my classmates at Michigan. So, but super proud of Mike Legg for pulling something ridiculous like that off. But that was kind of the team that we were at that time, and a little bit of swagger, but not in a million years would I have ever thought he was actually going to try that silly thing and actually get away with it. So
that's such a great story, because, no one knows, you just think that all of a sudden that kid just was born with, able to do that. But to hear that he was working on that, at the end of practice, anytime he could, all year for years, and to be able to pull it off on that big of a stage is pretty impressive. And, that's why it's such a famous moment in time.
It was special to be a part of. No question.
So you win the national championship. What year was that? Was that your junior or senior year?
That was my junior year, and had a great run, obviously in the Final Four there, and ended up playing BU, which BU's team was just absolutely jacked and loaded and stacked with, Chris Drury and Mike Greer and all these guys that, Jay Pandolfo, guys that played years and years in the NHL. We came out in that game and probably played our best game that we had played all year,
wow.
and just handed them a thumping of, I think, 3 or 4-1. I think it was 3-1, but it wasn't even a contest, I don't think, if you look back at the game. We had just control of the game the entire time. And then, ended up playing a Colorado college team, with Don Lucia at the helm. And I got to know Don and Tony here living in Minnesota now. And Don still, asked me every day for his ring because we took it from him, and, when I see him. So yeah, that's when I first came in contact with Don, and, they had a fantastic team too, well coached, disciplined, and we ended up beating them in the national championship game. So,
ouch.
Yep.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, it was a outstanding run, and I still think our senior year was probably, and Berenson would say this was probably our best team that we ever had at Michigan. The expectations for us to win again, and we went through the regular season and the playoffs and got to the Frozen Four and ended up having a rematch against BU. And BU wasn't as talented, but they ended up beating us in the semifinal game. And that was probably the most disappointing thing I'd ever been a part of up until that point in my career, because we were on a mission and playing like, playing like men possessed, and they came out, and that's what's so stinking difficult in one game series. Anything can happen at any juncture, and they got the best of us that night for sure. Yes,
I say ouch just because, the Gophers recently got eliminated. It's tough because you think about the opportunities. I got to play in 3 Final Fours, and closest I got was double overtime, and so I didn't mean to take anything away from what you guys accomplished by saying that. Congratulations. I'm really happy for you.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Well, the Gophers were always a very formidable foe that we got to play 3 or 4 times a year at the there was a tournament in Wisconsin that we always play them in. Then we usually see them in a semi or in a regional tournament. And then we played, sometimes it was we played them a couple times, usually 1 or 2 times early in the year too. So, the formidable WCHA was always a good one to play against for sure. And that's the first time I ran into Mike Crowley, and as a defenseman in my, day and age, I tell him to this day, I used to chase him around the ice, and he was all over the place. I couldn't stop that guy. Probably one of the most gifted, skilled players I had ever seen. And he was behind the offensive net, and then 6 seconds later, he'd be at the, be out at the blue line defending something. I'm like, how the heck did he just get back there? So it was super fun to watch him. I hated playing against him, but super fun to watch when I was on the bench.
Yeah. So I want to shift gears here before we get to your professional career, because I heard something in one of the podcasts that I listened to that you were getting interviewed on. We think about the hockey component, but there's a lot of other things going on in a person's day besides hockey, and that's being, you go to school, you're going to get a degree. Talk about maybe some of your teammates that you played with there at Michigan. Maybe they didn't accomplish what you did in the NHL, but man, there's some successful people in the business world making this place better than before they found it.
Yeah, it's a pretty special group, and I got to give the credit all to that to Coach Berenson, to be honest. I mean, he was super adamant and super passionate about what the next steps were in our lives. Always. I mean, I had played 10 years of professional hockey and had won a Stanley Cup, and I'd be back in Ann Arbor, and he's like, "Hey, do you know what you're going to do when you're done yet?" And I'm like, "Coach, I still got 5-6 years left in me." I'm like, he's like, "You need to be thinking about it." And every single time, and he starts that as freshman year about, hey, are you going to class? What are you interested in? What are you liking to study? And you got to remember his background too. He, left Michigan a little bit early, joined the Montreal Canadiens, won a Stanley Cup with the Montreal Canadiens, and was back at business school finishing up his finals exams a day and a half later. So it's a guy that, it's a guy that is completely invested in his education, completely invested in the players that played for him, and making sure that we had educations and what we were going to do and a fallback plan and all these different things. And, he didn't feel like he's just, it wasn't just a hockey factory. He's more proud of the guys, we've on my team that won the national championship, we have 3 brain surgeons, for Pete's sake, on that team. Like very, very, very accomplished, well-written and researched, like brain surgeons. One of them is at the University of Florida and heads up the whole neurological department at the University of Florida. One's down in Arizona. We have an orthopedic surgeon that's up in Green Bay that works with the Green Bay Packers, Harold Schock. We have a lawyer. We have an assistant general manager. We've got 3 or 4 people that run their own businesses. These are all highly, highly successful, well-rounded, passionate individuals that are just doing great things in the world. And he speaks about those guys way more than he speaks about the Brendan Morrisons that won a Hobie Baker and the Blake Sloans that won a Stanley Cup, or the John Maddens. He's super proud and, feels responsible, as he well should, for those guys doing such great things after they were done playing.
Well, that is awesome. Because, you think about today, we are so invested in our kids, and you kind of lose sight that, what's the real goal. We still want to be able to chase that big dream, but we also have to take Red's advice. What's going to happen when it's all said and done. That is great messaging. You got lucky with that guy.
Yeah, I was very blessed, and he's a special person to me, and I know he's a special person for a lot of people that he's touched along the way. It's I was pretty fortunate to have him in my life, for sure.
So how do we transition into pro hockey? Because I think that you were kind of just being the secretary for your roommates to their agents, and something happened, and take it from there.
Yeah, I was literally, just a secretary. At that time, we didn't have the cell phone. So, we had Jason Botterill, who was my roommate for 4 years at Michigan. He was drafted by Dallas, 19th overall in the first round. So his agent would, call consistently. Brendan and Warren Looning had a guy by the name of Kurt Overhart. And, Kurt's business has now exploded, but Kurt was ended up being the guy that I think I may have been maybe one of the first guys that, as he was starting his niche at the college ranks back in the day, he wanted to invest his time in a quote unquote dark horse. And, as he's sitting in the house one day, I'm, waiting for Brendan and Warren to come back from class. He's like, "Hey, what are you going to do next year?" And I'm like, "Well, I think I'm going to teach." And he's like, "Oh, that's interesting." He said, "Well, if I could find you a place to play, would you want to play?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I think that would be great." And, I said, "Well, Kurt, I don't have any money." He said, "Well, if I get you an opportunity, we'll figure that out after the fact. It's a fee after that. But I have to get you a job and you got to make the team." And I said, "Oh, sounds great." So I ended up leaving school. I did a bunch of interviews for some teaching opportunities, and trained all summer. And I'm like, man, I haven't heard from this Kurt guy in a while, and it's August 1st. And I call him and I say, Kurt, what's going on? He said, hey, I'm working on a couple things, and anyone who's dealt with an agent, it's interesting. I'm very good friends to Kurt to this day, but I bust his chops. Obviously he's not going to be spending a crap ton of time on a guy like me that's just, going to maybe get an opportunity to make a minor league team at some point.
Right.
So he's like, I got a couple of things in the mix, and I said, okay, well, when you thinking about sharing that with me? And he's like, well, I think in about 2 weeks. So it gets to be about August 20th, August 30th, finally he calls and he said, hey, I have an opportunity for you. It's with the Houston Aeros. You're going to go down and try out for the team. And I'm like, perfect. I know like Brian Wiseman from Michigan is there. David Oliver's there. Cam Stewart's there. So 3 guys from, that were seniors when I was a freshman are there. So I know a couple guys. That's outstanding,
Yeah.
And he's like, well, there's some bad news to that too. And I said, well, okay, what's that? He said, well, they keep 7 defensemen and they've already got 8 that are under contract. And I'm like, well, okay. And he's like, well, and there's also 10 other guys that are going to be there at the tryout. And I'm like, well, Kurt, I'm not a math guy. I'm an English guy. But like, that doesn't seem like a very good opportunity to me. And he's like, well, it is what it is. I mean, you got to go down and make a team. So I went down there, and I remember getting off the plane in Houston, and it was Houston weather. It's August 20th or something. August 30th, September 1st. I mean, I get off the plane and it's like 115 degrees, and I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. My flip flops I could feel them melting on the tarmac as I walked off the plane. It was so stinking hot. And I'm like, how do people play hockey here? Like, this is ridiculous. But I end up going in, and the coach there at the time was a guy by the name of Dave Tippett. And I go through the first week of training camp, and they start making cuts and getting guys out of there. And all of a sudden we get down to an exhibition game, and I'm in the lineup and I'm playing in the exhibition game. And he's still got 9 defensemen there. And 2 days later, he's got to make a decision on how many guys he's going to keep around. He ends up trading 2 guys. And he calls me in the office and he said, Blake, he said, here's what I want to do. You've played really well. I want to keep you here, but I'm going to put you under a player tryout. It's a 10-day player tryout. So basically you're playing for your next, contract 10 days from now. And I said, well, I guess that's great. So I've been living at the hotel for a month now. I go back to the hotel. I ended up being in the hotel, the Courtyard Marriott or something, for almost 3 months. And I was playing from 10-day contract to contract to contract. And
now, hold on. Put this into context. How many other teammates of yours were under a similar contractual agreement with the team
at that time?
Yeah.
Maybe 1, maybe 2.
Yeah.
But everyone else was signed. Yeah. Officially, quote unquote, signed for the year. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm living I've got my same suitcase. I've been there for 3 months. I got to know Chris, the bus driver, who was driving me to the rink every day because I have no automobile. I ate breakfast with Martha and Samantha, who were the front desk ladies, for 2 months. Yeah, it was bizarre. And the weirdest thing about it is, like, I'm a college kid just graduating. I have zero money. And I'm down there, and the most exciting part for me was every day that I was there, I was getting $55 cash in my pocket that, like, I could go out to eat with. I was like, this is freaking unbelievable. I'm like, this is awesome. I'm like putting like $25 in my pocket. I'm eating out like a king, I'm like, this is freaking brilliant. So Tip finally calls me in the office. It's got to be damn near Thanksgiving at that time. And he says, he looks at me and he says, Blake, he said, I'm going to sign you for the rest of the year, and offer you an opportunity for next year for a whopping $22,500.
Wow.
And it was the minimum at the time in the IHL. And he looked at me and he said, yeah, you go get an apartment, you can move out of the courtyard. And he must have saw my face kind of like get scared or something, because he looks at me and says, what's wrong with you? This is where you say like, tip, this is great. Thank you. You know, like, I really appreciate the opportunity. And I said, well, Dave, I don't have any money to get a car. He's like, so let me guess, you don't have any money to get an apartment? I'm like, no. So he looks at me and he goes, all right, he goes, go talk to Karen. He goes, I'll give you an advance, on your next couple months, so you could go get a car and apartment.
Wow.
Yeah. And so he helped me out, and I went and ended up moving in with an old time buddy of mine. Spent $300 a month on rent and went down to a CarMax. So if you ever want to learn about salesmanship and, what it's like to be, feel like a piranha in a orca whale community, have a hotel van drop you off at a CarMax with your hockey bag and your bags when you go to a car dealership. Because that was my first experience buying a car. And I think I have traumatic stress syndrome because of it to this day, because I can't stand it. This guy let me off in the heat, in November or some point, and I had about 15 people come swarming me and saying like, this guy's not leaving without a car today. And I'm like, yeah. So I purchased a wonderful, 8-year-old Honda Accord, and that was my vehicle for the next 2 years, for the next year and a half before I wound up in Dallas.
And how did you end up there?
Again, at this point in my life, Lance, I was playing hockey, having a blast, just really enjoying what it was I was doing. I was making zero money, but I was loving the game. The toughest part for me, honestly, was like, you're used to being with all your buddies at, college and whatnot. And, you're done with practice at 1 PM. So to fill your days with something productive to do between the hours of 1 and, 10 o'clock at night, you got to be a little bit creative in those things. Like, I went and took line dancing lessons. I, spent time at libraries. Like, I was doing all sorts of crazy stuff. Yeah. I would look in the paper and Friday Night Lights, big Texas high school football. I would choose a game every week if I was in town, and I'd go and like watch Friday Night Lights football in Houston, which was amazing. I got to be a huge high school football fan. So that was like stuff that I was doing on the side, and just trying to keep myself, active and busy, and keeping my mind, sharp and whatnot.
But on the flip side, there's another group of players that they're at the bar, they're shooting pool, having beers, living a different life,
every day, as you all know, so I was a little bit of the dork that I didn't do those things, but I'm like, I didn't care. I was kind of comfortable in what I was doing and having fun, just being a part of the Houston Aeros. And our team was freaking awesome. We were kicking butt and taking names. We played that year. We made it to the, conference final, had a great end of the season. I went back home and trained and did, got ready to go. And all of a sudden, I get we go to Las Vegas that second year I'm there. I'm just starting to learn the defensive position and at the professional level. Right. And I'm like, okay, I'm starting to get the real hang of this. I'm starting to be, productive, quote unquote. Tippett's giving me lots of kudos. Dave Barr is our defensive coach at the time, and he's working with me tons. We go to Las Vegas about in October or November of the year. And we have a game Monday night in Las Vegas, and they were in our conference at the time, or a division, or whatever they call it. And then we didn't play again until Friday. Well, that's a long time to be in Vegas, Lance. We had some guys disappear for a few days. They weren't in the best of spirits, and health when they came to the rink for the Friday night game. We had a couple guys getting some fights. All of a sudden, Tippett looks down to the end of the bench, and he doesn't have any forwards. So he comes down and he says, Sloan, you're going to play forward, for a couple shifts. And I'm like, Tip, I haven't played forward. Last time I played forward was when I was 8. And he goes, don't care. I need you down here. And I'm like, yes, sir. Message received. So I go down there and I'm like, I remember my first shift playing forward. I was like, oh my gosh, what the heck is happening? Where am I? I'm like, I don't like these people behind me. Like, he's like, go get the gosh darn puck and make a play. So I ended up playing that game, and apparently he thought I did a really good job because he started playing me at forward. Every other game we had guys hurt, injured. Then I'd go back to D. And then it turned into, from a game to game situation, it turned into like I'd play a couple shifts at D. During a game, he said, Sloan, come down here. I need you at right wing. I go down and play right wing. He goes back to D for a few shifts. I play. Finally, I got to the point where I was like, Dave, listen, I'm like, I'm not helping you in either position right now because I don't know how to prepare for this. I said, can you help me and just say, like, give me an idea, like if I'm going to be playing both, if I'm going to play on the back end, the forward end, what? And he's like, yeah, I can do that. So we had this agreement moving forward. Like, he was always giving me a heads up on it. So the Kalamazoo K-Wings came into town, and I prepared all week. And Kalamazoo was the farm club of Dallas at the time. I was preparing all week. We had two defensemen that were injured. And all week I'm playing D. And it turns around Thursday night after practice. We have a practice till about 1:00 in the afternoon. And he comes to me and he says, hey, you're going to play D, or you're going to play forward all weekend. And I'm like, what? I'm like, we've got 2 D hurt, Tip. Like, why am I playing forward? And he's like, don't worry about it. I said, I want you to play forward. We need you against this team. They've got some D we need you to get after and create some havoc. And I'm like, that's just what we're going to do. And I've got 2 defensemen I want to look at from Austin who I'm going to bring up. And so he kind of played it off. But in the background, from what I understand, some of the scouting staff had seen a couple games with me at forward, and they asked Tippett to play me at forward in that weekend series because they were going to come down and watch the games. He obviously didn't want to tell me that to quote unquote make me nervous. Now, at this time, Lance, just to set the stage, the Houston Aeros we were like 50-12 in the IHL, and we were killing it. We were having an awesome year. And the Dallas Stars at this time were like 50-12. Like they were on this collision course to win a Stanley Cup. We were on a collision course to win the Turner Cup. So like hockey in Texas right now is like crazy. Houston and Dallas are like, we're getting 12, 13,000 at our games, or we're having a blast. It's fun. Wow. And there's this other entity in Dallas that's like, this whole other thing. Never in my wildest dreams, I swear to goodness on my life, did I ever think that, there was the occasional comment, as like, hey, Dallas's brass is in the stands tonight with contracts in hands. But I was like, yeah, whatever. Like, that's not, they're kicking ass and taking names. Okay. So I have the weekend series. The team does well. My agent happened to be in town. Kurt was in that town that weekend. And we, have some fun after and go to a couple, establishments and have a beer or two, nothing crazy. And on Monday, Tip gave us a day off on Monday. And, I'm walking out of my apartment with my golf bag to go, because beautiful thing, in March at this time, you can go play golf. It's freaking outstanding. And I'm like, my phone rings, and Kurt had just left to go to the airport. And he calls me, he says, Sloan, what are you doing? I'm like, Kurt, I'm going to be late for a tea time. A couple of the boys are going to meet me. And he's like, well, you can't go to the airport for a little, or you can't go to the golf course for a little bit. And I said, Kurt, I just saw you. I got to go. I'll talk to you later. He goes, no, Sloaney, Bob Gainey is going to call you in about 10 minutes. And I'm like, Bob Gainey from the Dallas Stars? And he's like, yes. And I'm like, why? And he's like, that's what I said. I said, like, why? And he's like, well, he would like to talk to you about coming to Dallas and playing for them. And I'm like, I literally said it out loud to Kurt. I'm like, what, to carry their stick bags? And he's like, no, he thinks like they came this weekend, they watched you play. They think you can add something to the team, something that they're lacking. And, he's like, he'd like to call you. And I'm like, okay. Wow. So 5 minutes later, Bob calls me on my Ring phone in my hotel, in my apartment, my condo apartment or whatever. And he says, says who he is. And he said, what do you think you can help us do? And I, said, I I'm not sure, Bob. You guys are a pretty talented hockey club, but I think I can just provide you some energy, some quickness, and I'll just try to do my best.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
one of those type of things. I mean, what's he looking for there?
yeah.
Um, and Bob was very much like Red. They're cut from the same cloth, and that's why I was really fortunate to have played for a guy like Red. Um, so he said, "Hey, I'll work out the details with Kurt." He said, "I'd like you at practice tomorrow morning. At 10 a.m. Pack up your stuff and leave." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh!" So I called Tippett right away, and he's like, "Yeah, I know." And I said, "Well, Dave," I said, "I don't think I should go." I'm like, we have a great team here. We're going to win a Turner Cup. I'm playing a ton. Like, this is really fun. He's like, "Sloaney," he's like, "if you are at practice tomorrow, I will drag you off the ice and drive you to Dallas myself. So please go to Dallas. I don't want to see you again the rest of the year." And I
Oh,
said,
wow.
"Okay, Tip." So
Cool.
they ended up winning the Turner Cup. We won the Stanley Cup. I ended up playing in 19 of the 21 playoff games. I played, basically 12 regular season games, and then played almost every game in the playoffs, and did my thing, and was fortunate to get dragged along on a pretty unbelievable ride.
That that's an unbelievable story. Uh,
Yeah,
it's crazy.
it doesn't make sense even talking about it, to be honest, Lance. So
Oh, well, I know that I want to dive deeper into that, and maybe you would be so kind to come back on. We had a little technical difficulty, but I know you have a hard stop here, and you didn't even have time to have lunch. You had a little smoothie, so probably got to take a pee or something before your meeting at 2:30. But um, how about we end it now? And my hope is to have you back on again. Um, I guess I want to congratulate you on an amazing hockey life so far. What you've shared, nothing was ever given to you. Your story is authentic. It's genuine. Has great messaging. And I guess if I was the parent of a young hockey hopeful out there, and was looking for someone to study or have my kids study to go from good to great, Mr. Blake Sloan is someone I would highly recommend. I would highly recommend. So, Mr. Sloan, thanks for sharing your hockey journey with the listeners. They're going to love it.
I appreciate it, and I'd be more than happy to come back on. I think the biggest piece of the story and the most interesting piece isn't, to be honest, the hockey stuff, Lance. To me, it's the transition after. As you well know, it's a very, very difficult and trying time to transition after doing something you've done for such a long time. My father-in-law was a dentist for 40 years, and I said, "Jeff, what would happen if someone came in and said you can no longer practice dentistry after 19 years of practicing? What would you do?" And he looked at me like with this blank, doe in a headlights look, and he goes, "Oh my gosh, I don't know. I'd probably go crazy." And I
Yeah.
said, "Yeah." So think about that, for your listeners out there. I've been very fortunate to have found the company that I've worked for to this day. But that transition and that lifestyle, there'll never be anything like that in my life again. So how do you channel those energies to something positive and delivering those great messages? And that's why I'm so involved with hockey now. The coaching for me has been a great outlet. I've coached youth hockey now for a long time, and business wise has been fantastic. And my family is obviously a blessing for me as well. So next time we can dig into all that. How's that?
No, I think that's, and I agree with you. I think that there's a lot of stuff that's you've been thinking about a lot, have made part of your life, and have packaged it all together to where if you're in front of some young impressionable person, you're having a consistent messaging, trying to just guide these young people in the path that we all hope that they go on. Because as you said,
100%.
it's, it's a team effort, my friend.
Yeah, it's always a team effort.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
speaking of the team, I appreciate the great questions, and thanks for having me, Lance. I really appreciate it, man.
Awesome. Well, I'll get in touch with you. Let's do this again because I don't want to have it like months away, but I'll text you after. But thanks again for being here. And I know you're going to be golfing here. You probably already have, but the snow's just started to melt. Have a great rest of your week here and weekend, and hopefully our paths will cross in the near future.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Well, that concludes another episode of the Hockey Journey podcast. I can't thank you enough for stopping by and listening. I hope you enjoyed hearing part 1 of the hockey journey of Blake Sloan, and what a journey it was. That was an awesome conversation, and I look forward to part 2 in the near future. Lastly, if you think there's someone in your circle of family and friends that might like this episode as well, please share it with just one person. It will really help me in growing this hockey community. Again, I appreciate you being here. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, or submit a review. I hope to see you back here soon, and do me a favor, make someone close to you smile today. All the best, my friends.